Hello everyone, this is part 24 of What If Naruto was in Anbu at 6, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Akina woke with a slight start. A minor gasp escaping her lips as her eyes shot open. Thin beams of light trailed in from the small openings in the tent she was in. The brown drapes that served as the tent's roof shined in a lighter shade due to the bright sunlight outside. The sound of laughing children reached her ears, along with the commotion of what she could only guess was some kind of marketplace considering the myriad of sounds. She sat up on the haphazard cot looking at her surroundings. Finding a small fire pit in the center of the tent, smoking with the slightly glowing ashes that remained from whoever had set the fire the previous night. Apparently whoever these people were, they had somehow managed to feed her because the ache and gnawing pain that had been gripping her stomach and the weakness and weighing down on her extremities was gone. Her skin was a bit paler than she remembered it, though that could just be the dim lighting of the tent. She looked down at herself, finding that her sea and abdomen was wrapped securely in bandages. A few minor red blotches were still apparent where the burns had taken a bit longer to heal than the rest of her injuries. The lower half of her waist was covered by a pair of long, slightly torn brown pants. They fit well enough though. She gulped a bit, sincerely hoping that whoever had changed her had been a woman and not some perverted guy that had gotten a free show. Though the woman, given whatever preference she had, could have been considered to have gotten a free show as well now that she thought about it. She looked around one more time, but this time caught sight of a pair of eyes attached to a very short body peeking in from a small opening. She opened her mouth to speak, but as soon as she did, the child, startled at having been seen, scurried off before she could say anything. "Hey, wait," she called before standing up, wincing at the soreness in her legs and arms, carrying up the small blanket that she had been sleeping with and draping it over herself as she stood. She made her way to the entrance of the tent. Apprehension gripping her sea with a faint presence as she wondered just who she would see out there. Most people she knew have lived in villages, not in tents and huts, unless of course they were in some type of military encampment. But if that was so, children would certainly not be freely roaming around as they seemed to be doing. So pushing the small bit of apprehension away, she peeked out of the tent. The sight that greeted her seemed to be that of, well, if she didn't know any better, some kind of refugee encampment. But it was too big. This couldn't be a refugee camp. Most of these camps held 50 to 200 people at the most. But this one seemed close to nearly triple that amount. The people went about their business, not noticing that the guest had woken. Men carried large boxes to and fro to their destinations, while some of the women worked around the camp itself, some setting up tents and others cooking the hunt the others had caught. The children she couldn't see, but she could certainly hear their rambunctious laughter and rehousing clear to her from whatever distance they were. Fanning out her senses, she found many ninja were amongst the crowd, most Chunin, though some could be Junin or possibly Anbu. It was then she heard the shuffling of rapidly approaching feet and her tuned senses fixed themselves on the strongest chakra source approaching her. Looking a little to her left, she saw a child, most likely the one she'd seen outside the tent, approaching, dragging behind her a rather tall man, easily 6 feet 2. He dwarfed the seemingly 6 or 7-year-old girl. The amount of chakra she could sense of him was easily Junin level. He wore a yellow jacket with a navy blue undershirt with a matching yellow pair of pants. He had short cropped orange hair that was barely an inch tall. "Yuichi, what is it now, eh? I have things to do. I can't play," he argued as he tried to pry his hand from the girl's grip as gently as he could. Obviously this big guy had a soft spot for children. The little girl stopped a few feet away from her and pointed. The larger man's eyes followed the direction of her finger and caught sight of the blonde-haired former Kumo Kanoiki. A smile spread across his face, his bright green eyes lighting up, and for a moment she thought he was simply far too bright to be a shinobi. Red flags went up in her mind as her first suspicion was that it was some kind of deceit. Still, despite the prudence and likeliness of such a thought, she quickly pushed it aside. It wouldn't do well to be suspicious of her apparent rescuers, at least, not openly. "Oh, you woke up, eh? Lucky for you, we didn't think you'd make it past the 3rd day when we found you." the man commented as he stepped forward, the little girl hiding behind his leg. She had to crane her head back a bit in order to keep eye contact with the strange orange-haired man. I bet you're kinda confused, yay, he said after a brief moment of silence as he scratched the back of his head. He extended his hand. My name's Haru, the elected leader of this camp. What's yours, eh? Akina moved to answer when a tug at the bottom of Haru's pants brought her attention down to the little girl. Oh yeah, and this little one is Yuichi. She and some of the other kids found Ya when they were playing down by the beach. Akina smiled, though it still held a little bit of nervousness. Really? My name's Akina, I guess I should thank you for saving me then, she said, smiling down at the little girl who blushed a bit at the praise coming from her. Yup. Haru nodded, ruffling her hair affectionately as the little child beamed at the praise from the two adults. As she looked up to Haru's eyes, Akina caught sight of a small tiny scar on the side of her tee. Haru smiled at the girl. Okay now Yuichi, I'll take care of the nice lady for you. Go on and play now. Yuichi smiled happily before running off. Haru watched her go with a slight upturn of his lips. She's a good girl, yay. Pride was heard in his voice as he spoke of the small dark-haired girl. Akina nodded, turning her eyes to Haru as she spoke. I'm sorry to ask this, but who are you people? Why are you living in such conditions? Haru finished for her as he again scratched the back of his head. His expression a strange mix of sadness, irony and bitterness. We all came from different places, but we're here because we've basically left our villages. Akina blinked for a moment. You mean, you're all fugitives? Fugitives is one name for us, yay. Or at least the name Konoha would give us. So you're refugees? Akina asked rhetorically, somewhat shocked despite her initial suspicion of the same. But this camp is so big, Haru interrupted with a tired sigh. Yay. Just goes to show how many lives that Demon Cage has broken with his damn wars. Haru seethed, his eyes gaining a hardened edge to them, the previous gentle countenance vanishing for a moment. Guy's a damn monster. Akina would have agreed had it been a month ago. Everything had been black and white to her then. Everything was so clear to her then, and now she wasn't so sure if she had ever been on the right side, or even if there was a side to be on. Before she could even realize why it had come to her, a thought slipped into her mind. There must be a reason for what he does. And even though she initially reeled from the thought, she realized with some clarity that it must be true. That there must be some reason, some event, some drive that compels him to do what he does. But what was it? And even if there was one, could it ever justify all the be on his hands? She didn't think so. Again Haru scratched the back of his head. Apparently that was a habit of his. Turning to her, he forced a smile onto his lips. Bar enough of this depressing stuff, eh? His voice brought her out of her melancholy thoughts as he wrapped an arm around her shoulders in a friendly gesture, smiling down at her with that bright smile of his. This is a time to be celebrating the fact that you're all right. I shouldn't be depressing you like this, eh? Thanks, but you barely even know me. For all you know, I could be an enemy spy sent to infiltrate your camp. Shouldn't you be just a little more suspicious, like asking me where I came from and what happened to me and stuff like that? She questioned incredulously. The sheer absurdity of how trusting this man seemed to be catching up to her. She had always been trained to look for deceit behind every kind smile and friendly face. Funny, maybe she should have looked for it in the face of the man that told her to do so. Haru's smile, though dimmer, was still in place. We have had to look out for spies in the past, that's true. But I don't know, you just don't have that look about you. You just look like someone who's a little lost right now, eh? That, and if you're really a spy, you deserve to infiltrate us after nearly killing yourself down by the beach, eh? That's commitment. The man laughed at his own joke. Akina, startled, took a step back. Looking up at the brightly dressed refugee leader, she looked like she was about to ask something when a man ran around the corner of one of the other tents. Haru-sama, we need you on the north perimeter. Masakage has injured himself. Well, looks like I gotta see this short. Look, I'll talk to you later, okay? Right now I gotta go see what's wrong with one of my guards. You can walk around the camp as much as you want. Just remember, this tent is yours, so come back here when you're done. Don't get lost, I do still need to ask you a few things to see what you'll be doing around here. And before she could say anything, Haru turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the middle of this completely unknown group of people. She looked around, panicking for a moment. She moved to call after him, but by the time she had brought her eyes back to where he had been walking, he was already gone. So giving the place another once over, she walked back into the tent to try and find some warmer clothes. If she was gonna explore this camp, she sure as hell wouldn't walk around with just the clothes and blanket she had on. As she entered the tent, she let her previous meeting pass over her mind. It was odd, and the red warning flags that had been going off in her head were still very much standing. But that wasn't what concerned her presently. No. Her concern was what she would do now. She had escaped Kumo, that much was true. But now what? Where does she go from here? What does she do? Does she just disappear and leave this damn world with her brother and a traitor of a sensei to rot and burn in its own devices? No, she couldn't do that. She couldn't do that simply because, despite Liang, there were still people she cared about in Kumo, people who were her friends, her family. She couldn't just abandon them to Liang or to Naruto. But where could she go? What could she do now, here? In this place where she held nothing, no rank, no connections, not even a B weapon. And even if she had those things, what would she do then? Would she keep being Liang's pawn and fight her brother? She wasn't even sure she wanted to fight Naruto anymore, and that to her was terrifying. All the hatred, all the anger she held for him all these years, where had it all gone? She had seen only one individual who held as much hatred for Naruto as she had. The Nine Tails. And that simple fact was a brutally harsh blow to her already shaking foundations. What if that hatred hadn't been hers to begin with? What if it had all been the Nine Tails simply feeding his emotions to her? She had been bordering on obsession. That doesn't just vanish overnight, it couldn't. Had it been her decision, her choice to hate Naruto? Or did she ever have a choice to begin with? As the drapes closed behind her, 3 men gathered around Haru, each of them dressed in drab clothing and giving the appearance of normal civilians. Well, so what do you think? Don't know yet. I don't think she means us harm, but she was definitely unnerved when I mentioned Kumo. I want you to keep a close eye on her. We can't risk our camp being discovered by Konoha, Haru said before walking past the 3 men, who each looked at each other, giving a silent nod of assent before each of them vanished in a wisp of black smoke. Gaara sighed with exhaustion, allowing himself a virtual collapse, even though he was already sitting in his chair, letting his head fall onto his crossed arms that rested on the wooden desk. All around him were maps, scrolls, tactics, diagrams, troop requests and supply routes, all melded together to form one chaotic, mind-numbing collage of information that threatened to bring him straight to his knees with the force of the migraine throbbing right between his temples. Rough day, huh? A familiar voice responded from the doorway, and Gaara turned his head enough for a single sharp green eye to peek up and glare with the sharpness of a kunai knife at the intruder that dared enter this room while he needed several bottles of aspirin. This visitor, by the way, was none other than Haruno Sakura, bringing in, what do you know? Yet another massive file for him to sift through. At this rate, the Devil King didn't need to worry about winning the war, because by the time he was done reading and going through all these forms and plans, the war would be over and done with. Biting back several expletives that fit the situation, the Kazekage sat up again, glaring at Sakura, though it was more due to the circumstances of her visit rather than the visit itself. Wasting no time, however, he got down to business. Those, I assume, are the medical reports. Got it in one, she said with a quick smile as she set the files down in front of him, gaining a more somber look, however, as she spoke. I've put the ones I knew you'd want to read first at the top. Gaara's eyes snapped up to hers, his turquoise green eyes staring into her deeper jade ones as he held her gaze. There was a silence between them, punctuated by the fact that neither would look away from the other. Finally, it was Gaara that turned his eyes away from hers, down to the top file. Opening the parchment, he found the pictures of 2 very close friends of his, Akamai Chuji and Inuzuka Kiba. Gaara's brow furrowed, eyes narrowing in discontent as his fingers tightened minutely on the assorted papers before he released a heavy sigh, the papers slipping from his fingertips and limply falling onto the desk, adding to the mess already in place around it. Letting himself fall onto his chair, he released another sigh before looking at Sakura. Do you mind explaining these yourself? I hate medical files. Sakura nodded, understanding full well why he wanted her to speak even though the files were right in front of him. So clearing her tea, she stepped forward, grabbed the open file from his desk, before sitting down on the leather chair in front of him. She allowed her eyes to ghost over the pages she herself had written, refreshing her mind as to their content before speaking. Chuji's doing as well as can be expected. The nerve that was damaged in his arm, as we told you when he first received it, forced him to virtually relearn how to control his limb. Though he slips up a few times, it's beginning to become second nature to him. With an estimated 2 more weeks of intense physical therapy and medications with our medics, we estimate he'll be fit for duty in another. Though, since he hasn't been practicing as he had before, you can't expect his skills to be up to the same level he was before his injury for a while yet. Gaara nodded. I never would have expected that of him. Now, he paused, speaking somewhat gravely as he leaned forward, lacing his hands in front of his mouth. What of Kiba? Sakura's eyes closed, the lines of her face drawn tight, and Gaara could literally feel the stress behind those features. Kiba's physical condition has improved. He can stand, walk, and basically get through the day like a regular civilian. But as for his mental health, that's another matter altogether. What do you mean? Gaara questioned, eyes narrowing minutely. He's suffering from what's known as post-traumatic stress disorder. We see it often enough in our line of work, no doubt, but coupled with this disorder, he's also showing signs that he may become a manic depressive. The loss of his arm, his partner Akamaru, his position as the heir of the clan, and his shinobi career virtually overnight has put him on a very precarious edge. Hana has been visiting as much as she can, trying to keep his spirits up. Ino too has been trying to keep him occupied. But, we're also seeing another complication developing in him. He's developing an almost total fixation with the death of Konoha's cage. It's bordering on a dangerously unhealthy obsession, and his inability to be a shinobi due to Akamaru's death and the loss of his arm could drive him to a great deal of frustration that will even further complicate things. Sakura explained, her voice growing tighter and tighter by the second. Gaara rubbed the bridge of his nose. What can be done to counteract this? Kiba isn't just a good shinobi but a good friend. He deserves better than this fate. The cage said solemnly, his green eyes once again opening after a brief moment to stare into her own. Sakura sighed. Well, for one thing, placing him in constant presence of his friends would help. Granting him another partner, even a puppy, may also help if he wishes it. But in the end it comes down to one of two things. Either convincing him to give up the life of a ninja, or finding a way for him to get it back somehow. If he does give it up, then I personally believe his psyche will fall back into its proverbial place. But if instead we're forced to find a way to give him his career back, or if he finds one himself, we will have to monitor his mental condition very carefully. How carefully? 24-hour surveillance for as long as reasonably possible, as often as possible. She said quickly, her voice firm and sure. Gaara's eyes closed again before he waved his hand, dismissing her. Sakura stood, bowing once to the Kazekage before she turned and walked out of the office, closing the door behind her. Gaara stared at the file laying once again on his desk for what may have seemed like an eternity before he snapped, lashing out, his hands quick as lightning as they threw the papers aside. A growl escaped his teeth, the small white slips floating gently in the breeze before finally settling themselves. The harsh sunlight of Suna's sun glared through the windows, making the Kazekage's red hair shine with its own strange glint as his green eyes took on a hard edge. Temari once again found herself sitting in the library of the Demon King's estate, a book in her hands. Directly across from her, Hinata sat in a matching leather chair, a table separating the two as Hinata calmly sipped some tea while Temari read her book. The Suna Kanoiki glared at her Konoha counterpart, which Hinata calmly ignored or did not notice as she continued to drink her tea, her eyes ghosting over several more scrolls and books on the table in front of her. Temari's thoughts traveled to how she could escape this place. So far her attempts at finding a hole in the web that ensnared her had proven fruitless, and she quickly grew to fear that perhaps she wouldn't be able to get away from this place before Naruto tried to use her to get her brother to surrender sooner. So her thoughts had shifted to a different way she could help her brother. Descent. She may not be able to bring down the Demon King with just brute force, but even a great beast could be or at least crippled with poison. And the voice of dissent in a time of war was most certainly a very potent poison. Staring at the Hyuga, she guessed that this would be as good a time as any to begin her plan. Let me ask you something. Temari said out of the blue, closing her book and leaning forward a bit in her chair, catching Hinata's attention. If you must. The Hyuga head replied as she drank a bit more, her voice a bored drawl indicating she most certainly did not want to hear Temari's voice. Why do you do it, huh? Why do you follow a man like that? And don't give me that right hand of the devil crap. You're his general and a clan head, you hold one of the highest positions in this village, but hell, even you're scared of him. Fear and respect are two different things, Miss Sabaku, you should learn that. And denial tends to not work for very long. You should learn that too, princess. Temari said, huffing as she crossed her arms, leaning back in her chair. No matter what you say, it's clear as day that this entire village would rather be swallowed by the earth than be in his presence when he's around. Everyone, even your damn Anbu, recoil in fear. I'd be disgusted if I wasn't so confused as to the reason why you just stand by and let it be. Hinata's eyes narrowed with a bit of anger and annoyance seeping into the pearly white depths. You understand nothing of what he's done. Of what he tries to do. Her voice was like a glacier, sweeping everything in its biting chill. Then make me understand. Temari growled, fire burning in her eyes, a direct opposite to the frost in her counterparts as she stood up, Hinata following her example a moment later. Make me understand why it is that this whole village just bends over for this guy. He's strong, but so are you, damn it. He's not unbeatable. That much was proven in Kumo. Hinata's expression did not change from the previous cold anger that had been etched onto the lines of her face, and her voice came out as resolved as ever. He is the strongest of. So what? Temari growled, interrupting the Hyuga mid-speech, hiding a smirk as she did. She was rattling the cage. She doubted she had shaken the foundations of the Hyuga girl, but the Anbu, they weren't as certain, as secure in their blind following of this man, they could still be swayed. Might makes right, is that it, Hyuga? This time the voice that responded, however, was not Hinata's. Indeed it does. The effect was near instantaneous as Temari nearly jumped to the ceiling like a cat and Hinata's back straightened until she stood almost ramrod straight. Neither had sensed him entering the room, too distracted by the previous discussion to even have a hope of detecting the normally undetectable ninja. Temari turned around slowly, her silver-hued eyes slowly meeting his own as he stood in the doorway, watching them both through a veil of apathy and nonchalance. Slowly she gathered up her courage. Arguing with the Hyuga clan head was one thing. Arguing with this man was something else entirely. Still she felt secure in the knowledge that he needed her alive, not s, and the most he would do for her little insubordination would be to stick her in a cell or remove her privileges of walking around through this house. Or at least that's what she told herself. Still gathering her courage, she spoke again. So just because you're the strongest you get to do whatever you want, is that it? And what happens to those who weren't trained to be shinobi then, huh? What rights do they have? None. That's some rule you got there, considering just how many civilians there are. Naruto stepped forward, his imposing height now apparent as he easily towered several inches above her. He stared into her eyes that defiantly met his own, stubborn anger belying the fear that was the undertone of her gaze. Interesting, the Jinchuriki thought to himself, admitting that she was very brave, as well as very foolish to argue. His voice remained an apathetic drawl, boredom now lacing his tone. Despite what you may think, the fact is that in this world might does make right, and it has been that way long before I was even conceived. Is it not the strongest ninja of the village that became the cage? The strongest that advance in rank and gain more privileges? Is it not only shinobi or former shinobi that make up the village council? No, princess, might does make right in this world, he stated simply before striding past her toward his earlier destination. So that's your justification then? She argued to his back, fire once again simmering in her eyes. That's how you say all this death is acceptable? My justification, as you put it, will come once total conquest of this land has been achieved. Naruto said, looking over his shoulder. Hinata from her place observed the heated, at least in Temari's case, discussion. Her eyes wide and disbelieving as to what she was witnessing. Here this mere slip of Asuna Kanoiki was vehemently arguing with the man one simply did not argue with. Hinata had to think that she was either very brave, or very stupid. She was willing to bet a bit more on the latter. Justification through conquest? Temari asked incredulously as her gaze hardened. Then what happens when you lose her? What happens when you see that this world and the people in it won't just lie down and let you walk all over them? Then this world will burn, Princess of Suna. This time his voice was different, it was familiar, and it stopped whatever arguments she had in her tea. That was the voice of the man she had fought at Sakai, The mask and clothing may not be the same, but that bitingly cold voice certainly was even without the mask. You really are a monster, she said after a brief moment's pause. Perhaps I am, he admitted, but you are beginning to try my patience, he said, and Temari soon felt a firm quick push that shoved her back into her chair. Though it took her a moment to realize it, she soon deduced that it had been a controlled burst of wind chakra that had knocked her back. As Naruto turned to leave, he caught one last glance at the Kunoichi's eyes. The fire that had been there before was still simmering behind those lenses, burning hotter now than they had before. Most interesting. Naruto read over the report, his face visibly hardening as the lines of his features grew deeper with anger. He glanced up at Suzume, who stood in front of his desk, her fair features serious for once as she waited for his inevitable questions. This is a confirmed report. Suzume nodded. Every word, sir, she affirmed with a firm voice. Naruto fought back a snarl as he eyed the page. Zhuge Liang had struck out from Kumo, attacking the newly established garrison on Mount Etoku that had been set up by Toyohisa. The young man had managed to defend the border well for the first few skirmishes, showing that he indeed did have the potential to be his father's son, but after the first week Zhuge Liang had arrived on the field and using simple taunts he had fanned the flames of Toyohisa's rage. A simple act, especially when Toyohisa holds the Reikage personally responsible for the of his father. After that the battle had gone downhill, and it now seemed as though the northern garrison would fall, leaving the entire northern forest open for Kumo to invade, leaving little between that army and Konoha's very gate. Coming to a quick decision, he rose from his seat, his voice once again lowering itself to the familiar octave Suzume had learned to tread lightly around. Send out messages, he said, striding around his desk and heading for the exit. To who? She questioned, startled by the abrupt command and even more abrupt exit. Shino in Iwa and Kimimaro to the north. They are closest to Tushiro. Tell Shino to send one of the commanders under his lead, either Kurenai or Guy, and tell Kimimaro to either come himself or for Anko to come, I don't care which. Before she could respond, the door shut. His orders were clear, and Naruto, at this point, had very little patience for repeating himself. Akina sat in front of a large bonfire, a thick wool blanket wrapped around her shoulders as she watched some of the refugees around the fire, all engaged in various discussions, varying in nature as they each ate some of the prepared food from their plates. She herself was enjoying a chicken soup, which had been served in a small tin cup. Of course, she could only assume it was chicken soup. After all, it was kinda hard to tell considering there was no chicken in it. Some of the refugees had sought out conversation with her, but she had politely turned them down, saying that she needed some time relatively alone to think. Some had nodded and left it at that, others having thrown knowing looks in her direction as they walked away. Apparently it was a common occurrence for new arrivals. Still, she really did need to think about what she would do now. She couldn't stay in this camp forever. Either Liang or Naruto would find this place soon. If not looking for her the first time, then certainly the second. No, she couldn't stay here. Her very presence was a danger to these people. She needed to leave, and she needed to leave soon. Yo, Miss Gloom and Doom, came the familiar voice of Haru, startling her as the large man simply plopped down at her side, a large plate of potatoes, pork and a variety of other things she wouldn't eat, considering the fact that they were still moving, adorned his plate. What you doing out here all by yourself now, eh? Akina shifted to get a little distance between herself and the ever-smiling Haru. Oh, Haru, she said with a hint of nervousness in her greeting, offering a hesitant smile as he sat. I was just thinking on some stuff, she said, hoping he'd be like the others and catch the hint. Unfortunately he didn't and simply continued to chew his food, loudly. What about? He asked. She sighed in something akin to weariness. Nothing much really. Oh come on now. You've been sitting here looking like someone's been twisting your gut for the past hour, eh? He said, leaning closer as he offered her a drink she hadn't realized he had. Come on, he prompted. You'll feel better if ya talk about it, eh? Akina growled low in her tea, though she was truly appreciative, if however suspicious, of his generosity and easy acceptance of her since her arrival here. She really wasn't in the mood for someone who wouldn't just leave her alone for the time being. Haven't you ever heard the phrase, let sleeping dogs lie? Haven't you ever heard the phrase, no man is an isla, no woman is an island? Akina turned to glare at Haru, a expression adorning her features as the orange-haired ninja continued to plaster that smile all over his face like it was going out of style. Hey, with the way the world was going, maybe it really was. At the insistence in his eyes, the young Kunoichi sighed, hugging her knees as she pulled them closer to herself, her eyes turning to stare blankly into the fire that rose high in the center of the crowd's circular formation. After a few minutes of her silence, she spoke. I'm thinking what my next move is gonna be. What can I do from this point on? Haru blinked stupidly for a moment before he swallowed whatever he had been chewing. Why are ya thinking about that? It's not like we'll kick you out. You're more than welcome enough to join us on our road to Kumo. The bright ninja said with a smile, watching how her own features widened, and he could practically feel her heart skip several beats as the bead drained from her face. The light of the fire making her skin seem just short of ghost-like. What's the matter? He asked innocently, tilting his head as he morphed his face into a genuinely curious expression. You don't look so good, eh? You. Akina paused to moisten her suddenly dry lips. You're headed to Kumo. Haru nodded. Yay, we have to. We've got so many people we can't stay in any one campsite for more than a week at most, otherwise we'll get caught. Tomorrow we start packing up and the day after tomorrow we're on the move again. Kumo and Suna are offering sanctuary to every refugee of Konoha that wants to join them. Obviously they have some screening process that we all need to go through to keep up security, but we won't have problems. Akina seemed like a mouse, trapped between the cat's jaws or the mousetrap as her eyes darted left and right, her breath coming in shorter, harsher intervals. You can't go to Kumo, she said, turning her eyes away from him as she refused to meet his gaze, which was now slowly narrowing. Why not? He spoke, his voice carrying that familiar friendly lilt, a stark contrast to his darkening expression, the minute hand signals he made alerting his ninja to subtly converge around the area, preparing for when he gave the last signal. She said, swallowing thickly, the rakage he's not what you think. Haru hid his suspicion, once again placing a compassionate look on his face as he placed a hand on her shoulder, bringing her attention back to him. What is it, eh? What'd he do to ya? Akina once again turned her eyes away from his. Let's just say, he hid a lot of things that shouldn't have been hidden. Now here, Haru had something we call a conundrum. He could simply allow this Kumo nuke nin to do as she pleased. They were two people, technically on the same boat, running from their homes for their own reason, but they were obviously heading in the opposite direction from one another. But, if he did that, if he went with the age-old policy of, live and let live, there was a chance, the rakage could find out. And if he did, would he still accept them in his village? Could he risk the people under his protection for this one girl? It was as he was thinking this that she turned to face him, a new cloud shadowing her sky-blue eyes, forcing him to have to stop just short of reeling in surprise. Those eyes held a haunting image, a shadowed pain and a silent plea within them. Right now, without words she was asking, no, begging him for his help. To understand her plight. And he did. He knew he did. They all did. Everyone had their stories, their tales of broken lives and shattered dreams. That's what this place was, a sanctuary for all those whose lives had been destroyed, taken apart by the Devil King and his ambitions. Why should he believe that people in other villages were not suffering from their leaders as well? We will keep going to Kumo, he said after a moment, watching as her downtrodden expression deepened, turning her face away from his. But, he continued watching as her ears seemingly twitched and she allowed a small light of hope to re-enter her eyes as she turned back to face him. We can give you some supplies, and weapons, enough to at least get you on your way. He finished scratching the back of his head in that familiar nervous gesture. Akina opened her mouth to speak, but soon enough the only response she could think to make was, why? Because, he said, shrugging a bit as he stood up. We're taking our chance for a better life, and I don't think I should steal yours. He finished before walking away, taking another bite out of his meal. Akina watched him go, sadness etched onto her features. She looked down to her still half-full cup of soup. Her reflection stared back at her. But in response, she only saw the silhouette of a broken woman. A woman who couldn't even say she had a home to turn to anymore. She sighed, throwing away the rest of the soup with an air of self-loathing twisting around her. She needed to stop this worthless self-pity and get her act together. She didn't know what she was going to do once this camp left her, but by God she would have this figured out by morning. Ino! Sakura yelled as she made her way through one of the few oases that were a safe distance from Suna. The palm trees shielded her from the harsh sun, and the sound of a nearby stream could reach her ears. Ino, are you out here? The pink-haired medic yelled as loud as she could, hoping her friend would hear her and answer back. She had already been looking for a few hours, and this was the third oasis she'd been looking through for her friend, and if she had to deal with more sand getting in her eyes, or shoes, or hair, or places she'd rather not mention, Ino was definitely going to pay for this. Damn it, Ino! The pinkett finally roared, making several of the nearby birds soar away in fright. Gee, Sakura, I'm right here. Ino called out from beyond the trees. Sakura scowled, stomping her feet loudly as she pushed past the foliage. Finally, she approached the clearing where Ino was in, her pale blonde hair visible through the canopy. The blonde was visibly exhausted, breathing heavily as she leaned against a tree, a thin sheet of sweat covering her body. But as Sakura approached, she could tell there was another person in the clearing with her. Hana, she said, finally pushing through the greenery. What are you two doing out here? She questioned harshly after a brief moment. We are at war, and though it's unlikely, the enemy can always slip past our lines with a small group. We don't need two of our best getting K before there's even a battle. Oh, don't worry about us, forehead. Ino said, using that familiar name that always signified she was beginning to get annoyed with the pink-haired medic. We're perfectly capable of taking care of ourselves, she said, with some visible effort as she lifted herself up from her sitting position. Right, she said sarcastically, especially after you're thoroughly exhausted from having been training all day. Glancing around, she raised a skeptical eyebrow as she noticed the various pieces of rubble and sea-up mud stones around them, destroying the oasis' normal exotic beauty. What the hell were you doing here anyway? Elemental training, Hana said, speaking up for the first time from her place across from Ino. Sakura turned to the Inuzuka girl, her brow raising in question. Elemental manipulation. But you both already have an elemental affinity. We need more, Ino said fiercely, her mind flashing back to crimson eyes and searing fires for a brief moment before she pushed the image away, her eyes gaining a hard glint of determination within them. We need to get stronger. We all do. Hana nodded. Ino's right, she affirmed as she too stood up, meeting her two fellow Kunoichi at eye level. You remember what happened at Sakai, how powerful he was and how utterly useless we were. We can't let that happen again, we have to at least be able to injure him next time. Sakura glanced around the clearing again before looking at the two. So what affinities did you discover you had? Other than Ino's water and your earth? Hana smirked, as a red glow encased her open palm. Fire for me. Sakura nodded. Fire and earth affinities could be very powerful if one had large enough chakra reserves. She then turned to Ino, raising a brow in question as the blonde's eyes took on a somewhat smug glint as she drew a kunai, and a crude-looking transparent extension formed over the weapon. AA wind affinity. Sakura gasped, excitement overtaking her features. Though Suna had nearly a dozen individuals with a wind affinity, the loss of Temari had hit many people's morale, especially since she was considered the strongest with the affinity in Suna, other than her brother, though his came due to the Bayu within him and so he could never master it to the same degree she did. Another wind user added to their ranks would certainly give the troops some confidence, and some much needed good news. In a brief show of her excitement, Sakura let out a sound of delight as she moved forward and hugged Ino. This is great, Ino. God, wait till Gaara hears about this, she said with an excited air about her. Soon though, her elation dissipated and she looked sternly at her two friends, whose smiles also dissipated at Sakura's change of countenance. You know, the pinkett began, kneeling down as she took out two scrolls from her pouch tied to the back of her waist. It's kinda not fair that you two practice out here in secret all this time and you don't even tell me about it. When she looked up to face them, you could see a glint of playfulness in her eyes. I have some tricks I've wanted to try out too, ya know. As if waiting for her statement, there were two clouds of smoke at her side, making Ino and Hana back up in surprise. When the smoke cleared, it revealed two cat-like creatures, one made of white wood with blue seals around its body, the other in black with red seals, the metal joints creaking and clinking with every movement. Small distortions in the air revealed the chakra strings that extended from Sakura's fingertips. It was a combat puppet. The white puppet stood at roughly 4 feet on all fours, its tail was made of polished metal blades, connected through various joints, making it similar to a bladed whip, only much heavier. The claws on each of its paws, Ino saw, had small openings, like needles, possibly to release poison every time it made contact with an opponent's skin. There were also blades connected to where its shoulder blades were, standing straight up with a slight curve to them, roughly 15 inches each. The eyes of the creature were peculiar as well. They were made by a blue-hued crystal, but she could tell there was something behind it, though she didn't know what it could be. Its counterpart, though, the black one, was nearly 6 feet tall on all fours, and in the place of blade-like extensions, it had two, well, the best she could describe as would-be, cannons, atop its shoulders. Its tail was a spiked ball with chain, and the wood it was made of seemed to be much denser than its counterparts. Sakura stood, her two puppets taking up position in front of her. "I think I should teach you two some manners," Hana growled, gaining a hint of excitement in her features. "I hate cats. You know, there is something increasingly disturbing about seeing you put that armor on." The voice was familiar, the hesitance in it was as well. "Should you not be watching over Sabaku?" he questioned without turning to face the pale-eyed clan head. Pulling the metal gauntlet onto his arm, feeling its familiar weight and grip as he strapped on the buckles that held it securely to his limb, the claws glinting off the dim lighting that entered the room through the door Hinata held open. "It's under control," Hinata said without missing a beat, watching as, with a whoosh and the whipping sound of heavy material, his cloak was wrapped around his shoulders. She wondered, idly, if the crimson color was due less to the material but rather all the be that's been spilled over it, all the lives he's taken and the people he's broken. As the cloak wrapped around his shoulders, something else seemed to settle there as well. Something heavy and dark, a burden of sorrow, anger and loss. Gone was the man who had brought prosperity to his native home, who ruled this country with an unyielding, cruel, but relatively fair hand. In his place was the monster that dwelt deep within his soul. Blackened by sins and tainted by death, he was indeed the single most feared man on the face of the earth. He was the single most hated man on the face of this earth. When he turned to face her, he still had not put his mask on, having been placing the two swords in their proper position. Finally, he reached for the metallic piece. Again, she watched him don the mask. The mask, that seemed to consume who he was utterly. The cloak weighed him down in her eyes, shielding him while simultaneously revealing him to the hatred of the world. But the mask was different. When he put on that mask and hood, it was as if whatever was left of him, the man not the beast, was utterly swallowed up, vanishing into the dark void that his heart became when he donned this armor. It frightened her sometimes, the ease with which he discarded his emotions, his humanity. It made her hesitate, made her think that perhaps there never was a man that could be saved. That it was all along just a beast, a monster wearing the skin of the man, fooling them all as it dangled false hope before their eyes. But either way, man or beast, she did not care. She owed this man more than she could repay, more than she could ever give back. And if she had to follow either one, she would do it. Without hesitation. But it would be so much easier, if she could believe that there was some good in him. He strode past her, the mask and hood now firmly in place, his stride swallowing up the distance between himself and the exit with ease. "Where are you going?" she questioned, knowing the answer he would give but hoping for a different one. "To war," he said. Hinata closed her eyes, hearing the echoes of his footsteps before he vanished down the hall. She sighed, a weary, tired sigh as her head slumped forward. "I know," she whispered to herself before turning to leave, heading back towards where she could sense the wind mistress once again wandering the manor, no doubt searching for her means of escape. Idly Hinata noticed that rain clouds appeared to be gathering above. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.